Arrays. So the previous session, we had a look at data types, different kind of data types you can have in Kotlin. In this example, we are going to look at arrays, okay? So arrays are used to store multiple values in a single variable instead of having to create separate variables for each value, okay? So that's what arrays are used for. So to create an array in Kotlin, okay, for example, we are going to create an array of, let's say, an array of names, okay, or day names, should I say. So I would do var, I can use var, I can use var. Let me use val. We usually use val because we don't want to change it. Then you use var if you would like to change it. For this particular example, I'm going to use var. I'm going to use var, and then we're going to try and see what we can play around with. Okay. So var days or name days, for example, name days equals array of, okay? Then what my array is going to contain an array of strings, okay? So I'm going to use the double quotes, and inside the double quotes, I'm just going to write, let's say if I remember the day names correctly, it will be, for example, for example, I'll use Kwabina separated by commas, and then I'll use Kweku. I'll use Yao. I will use Kofi separated by comma again, and then Kwame, and then Chrissy. So that is how you create an array of strings, okay? We've just created an array of strings. Now, if I wanted to, let's say, for example, print my array of strings, right? You can just do a simple system.out.println, okay? And then when it comes to this, right, we cannot just print out everything just like that. So let's say, for example, I just wanted to print out the first element or the first element inside this array that I have, okay? Now remember that when you are dealing with arrays, arrays usually start with the index of 0, okay? It doesn't start with 1, 2, 3. So in this case, what we have here is we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, but the array sees this as 6 because 0 is part of it, okay? So if I wanted to print out, let's say, the first element inside this array, I would just call name days, and then with a box bracket, for example, with a box bracket, and then I would just put 0, and then this will print it out, okay? So what I'm going to do now is I am actually going to run my application, and then I'm going to show you how you can also run yours. So if you have an emulator already installed, if you don't have an emulator already installed, look at my other videos on how to install an emulator. I would also show it later on. So because we're running on Android Studio, I'm going to use an emulator to show this, even though I'm using system.out.println. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click on run main activity. When you run it, you will see this open logcat for emulator. If you click on it, and you should find this here, system.out.println name days Kojo. If I wanted to, let's say, print out number 4, for example, I will just run the same thing again. And then if I scroll down, you should be able to see Kofi here. Okay, so that is us running our using an array. Okay, so let's say, for example, you also wanted to find out, right, how how many elements are existing in the array that you are using, you can actually use, there is a, because you see, whenever we create the array comes with its own properties or some functions that comes along with it, which is called size, right? We can choose name days dot size, okay, which will output to us the size of the array or how many stuff we've created. So if you look down here, you would see the number 7, which basically tells us that, hey, you have 7 elements inside this array. Okay, so that's how array usually works in Kotlin. Okay, let's, for example, we wanted to use a loop, for example. So right now we've looked at arrays, so let's have a look at loops, and I'm going to particularly show you how we can use a for loop to print out all of these elements that we have in an array. Okay, so in Kotlin, an array loops are actually quite easy to use. Okay, all we need to do when working with loops is to use the keyword for, right? And then we define, let's say, for example, the variable of what it currently has. So for example, in Java, you can declare for loop int I equals 0, int less than this. In Kotlin, we're saying that for each element in the array, right? The current element, you can do whatever you want with that particular current element, okay? So what we're doing here is I'm going to use the keyword X in name days, okay, with my opening brace and closing curly brace. And then I'm just going to take system.out.println, and then I'm going to say name days, right? Instead of putting name days in there, I'm going to put X, because X actually stands for the current iteration that we're currently in, okay? So if I restart my emulator again to run it, what we should see is we should see all the names printed out. So we can see Kwabena, Kwejo, Kwabena, Kweku, Yao, Kofi, Kwame, Kwesi. And all we did was used a for loop to be able to print this out, okay? So for loops are something that you're going to be using quite a lot, okay? So to loop through an array elements, we use the for loop together with an in operator, okay? And you can loop through all kinds of arrays. The example I'm showing you is just an array of strings. We can also loop through an array of integers. So let's, for example, let's create another for loop with an array of integers. For example, so val, we can say num days equals array of, and then we can do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. What we can do now is just replace name days with num days. And then we can run our project again. And then if we scroll down, what we will see is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so that's how you use a for loop in Kotlin. Okay, so in Kotlin, the for loop is used to loop through arrays, ranges, and other things that contain a countable number of values. Okay, so this is a very simple way of how to loop through in Kotlin. Okay, very, very simple to use. To use a while loop. While loops are also something very different. So let's, for example, we wanted to let's say use a while loop. So let me take this off. Let's comment this out, and let's try to implement a while loop. To use a while loop, we can just say, let's show you an example of a while loop, because a while loop, it loops through a block of code as long as a specified condition is true, okay? So we might do var I equals 0, right? And then we can do while I is less than 5, okay? We're going to say system dot out dot print line I, okay? Now, if we leave our while loop like this, what we are going to get is an infinite loop. We're going to get an infinite loop because I remains 0 and 0 is always going to be less than 5, okay? So what we need to do is once it prints out the first line, we need to actually increment 0. How do we do this? We do this by doing I plus plus, which basically says increment it after you used it. Okay, so if we run this now, what we should see is a while loop. Okay, so what it does is that it looks at it like, okay, I is equals to 0. Let me check. Is 0 less than 5? If 0 is less than 5, then print I and then increase the I. So the time that the I goes back to the loop again, I has now changed to become 1. Then it checks again. Is 1 less than 5? Yes, it is. System.out.println 1. Then 1 plus plus. So basically, it plots itself and increments it by 1. And then it starts again. That is how a while loop works. Okay? So that's how you work with while loops.